he doesn't do a bad job of even singing to be a sheriff. I was warned by Tommy to behave, that we had the mayor, former mayor, the sheriff, that I better really behave myself while I'm here, so I'm trying to do that. Try not to be political, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. If you want to know my politics, I'll tell you privately, and I'm very conservative. I'll just leave it there. But anyhow, I'm glad to be here, and God bless you all. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. We live in such a busy time, and I'll tell you how I am as a preacher. If I got most of my flock there on Sunday morning, I'm happy. Those that come back on Sunday night and Wednesday nights and other times, we're grateful for you and wish you they could all come back all the time. But I'm just thankful for those that are here, and I appreciate you always doing that. I need to tell you another quick story. When I taught school for so long, the last 10 years I taught social studies. I told the Sunday school class the last 10 years I wouldn't teach Bible at Lipscomb because I didn't like what they wanted me to teach. But I taught social studies, but I taught AP classes, and my classes were full with a waiting list. And the word was, you got to take Mr. Blankenship's classes because he's the best storyteller in the world. So I guess I had all the tales I could tell from East Kentucky and all of that. When I was no older than 6 or 7, faintly remember this, we took our first trip from Wilkes-Barre, Kentucky to Gatlinburg. Now, my dad was a coal miner, and he was also a preacher, but we had very limited funds. Remember, there were no fast food restaurants. All your food was packed in your car. We stopped along the way at those old concrete picnic tables and eat that were in the country then. So we left and went through Pike County and cut across through Wise and all that area, and somehow we wound up to spend the night in Newport. I just remember Newport. And the only motel I ever recall being here, Newport probably wasn't very big back about 1961 or 62, I don't know. There was some little motel that was kind of shaped in a corner. There was a German Shepherd dog tied in a corner, and he rattled his chain all night. And I don't know where that was, where it might have been, but we spent the night somewhere here around Newport. Well, the next day we went in and spent half a day in Gatlinburg, drove across the mountain to Cherokee to see the Native Americans. I need to say that properly. And I understand Cherokee doesn't even look like Cherokee anymore. I've been told it's totally different. But anyhow, so we went over there, and then it started to get dark, and there's somebody over there. We were trying to, so my dad says, what's the best way for me to get back to Kingsport? And there's a shortcut. It's called Mount Sterling. That was the most horrifying experience. I'm still scarred from that, My nose bled. I just remember it was a dirt road. It was awful. But anyhow, some of you, so I'm sure you all still know where Mount Sterling is, and we were talking about it today. Somebody said the road's still not any better, I don't think, than it was back then. But anyhow, that was my experience when I hear Newport. That's one of the things that I always thought about. I have so much enjoyed this morning, and I have so much enjoyed the eating with you, and ladies, y'all, everybody just outdid yourselves. Most of all, it's the time to sit down together and eat together. And I think that, the first century church, they did a lot, and we sometimes, I think, confuse fellowship only with eating. Somebody said you can always tell a member of the Baptist church because they're carrying a bucket of fried chicken, and you can tell the Church of Christ people because they're carrying a casserole. Now, I don't, but anyhow, I'm not sure about that, but we do enjoy, our time together, and I've been blessed today to get to visit with my girl Heather, and I hope y'all don't think we just been selfish talking to each other, but we've had 43 years of gossip to catch up on. We've had a lot of, we've had to catch up on a lot of stuff, so anyhow, enjoyed that, but I think I have just been so blessed to meet all of you today, and I want you to understand that I am very country. And I'm a country person, a country preacher. I have a big garden. I've got potatoes up and cabbage and tomatoes and corn that'll be planted, and I'm just that way. And I went to Lipscomb, and the kids always made fun of the way I talked. I talked like people from the hills, you know. I remember my very first day at Lipscomb. I went across the store. There was a little store there, and I went in and I told the guy I wanted a carton of pop, and would he put it in a paper poke? He acted like he didn't know. I mean, I thought everybody knew. Do y'all know what a paper poke is? Okay, good. I'm glad. Exactly right. Did you know what a paper poke was? You're from? I didn't know you're from Alabama or something. Where are you from originally? See, yeah. You're okay. You're forgiven then. Yeah, Mississippi's farther back than Tennessee. But anyhow, so last time I checked, their education system was 49 out of 50, if I'm not mistaken. No offense, Tom. But anyhow, but you got out. You did okay. But so that was real funny. And so and it was like, you want what and what, you know? And I still tell that story because that usually the scene, the look on this guy's face. And so, I wore paints and I took a shower. And I put tar, we put tars on their car, don't we? We build fires in their fireplaces. And that's just the way I talked. And so they made fun of me for, and so I tried to cityfy a little bit, because I was teaching all those rich kids at Lipscomb. But, I just had to, I had to kind of learn to do that. And let me tell you something else. I didn't go to Freed-Hardeman. I went to Lipscomb. And in the Brotherhood today, we have to be really careful because some of our congregations have kind of drawn a line that if you didn't go to Freed-Hardeman, you're liberal. and so if you didn't go to Freed-Hardeman, you don't hold a meeting at their congregation, you don't speak at their lectureships, you don't do any of those things. Now that doesn't bother me because Darrell knows who Darrell is, and I know who I am. And I will assure you of this, that I'm probably more conservative than half the preachers coming out of Freed-Hardeman now, more than likely. So, but I just that's been kind of a pet peeve, Tommy, what you've probably seen it too. We've seen it sort of evolve. It's like, now, and I love Freed-Hardeman. David Shannon is a close friend of mine. He preached in Mount Juliet. He is a very good friend of ours. But again, we have to be careful with that in the church. We just don't label somebody a liberal because of where they went to school. We need to know what their doctrine and their teaching is, or we don't label them conservative or anti or any of those things, whatever. By the way, I was that a lot of people knew a man by the name of Earl Green, from over here, and I preached Earl Green's funeral a few years ago, and he came to Nashville and came over there, and Earl and I became friends, and somehow we just connected, and so several people that knew Earl Green because I figured everybody knew everybody in this county anyhow, pretty much, so along the way. Tonight I want to talk to you about a sermon that's kind of been a favorite of mine. It's a sermon that I've enjoyed preaching, and I haven't preached it in quite a while. But my sermon tonight is called The Power of Sin. Now, it's not a pretty sermon, okay? It's one of those sermons that's not pretty. There's a reason for it, because sin is not pretty. And if I don't change my mind, and I want to keep that, and Tommy and I talked about this, about not pinning me down on what topics I was going to preach on. I know what I'm going to preach on. I know what I'm going to preach on the last night of the meeting. But tomorrow night, I think, and I don't really know about Tuesday night yet, but I think I know. Tomorrow night, I think I'm going to follow up this sermon, The Power of Sin, with the power of the cross. Because I think it's probably only fitting that if we talk about the disease and the problem of sin, that we follow it up with the proper cure when we talk about that. And I made myself a promise a long time ago that I would never hold a meeting anywhere that I ever went without spending at least a certain amount of time preaching on the cross. Because we have too much today not preaching about the cross. We have too many stories and too many poems and too many illustrations and too many other things going on, and we just don't have enough Jesus. And the Apostle Paul said, I was determined, and when I came to you, and not with excellency of speech or any of those things, but to know nothing but Jesus Christ and Him crucified. The Ethiopian was converted because Philip preached unto him Jesus. And we should never be ashamed to preach Jesus. One more story. When I was in Paintsville, Kentucky, the church was growing like crazy, like nothing I'd ever seen. And we had a young guy there that had moved in from somewhere else, and we had an elders and deacons meeting, and I remember, here's what he said. Darrell preaches too many sermons on first principles. Now, I probably did because I was young and I didn't know much more than that. You know, I realized I was in my early 20s. But Darrell preaches too many first principle sermons. And I remember one of the elders looked at him and he said, Do you realize that last Sunday, we had a couple walk in this building who had never been in a service of the Church of Christ before, and they were baptized. And by the way, that couple now, he is an elder in Paintsville. So it kind of, you never know who's going to be there. And one of the elders said, look, Darrell preaches what we have asked him to do. So I never apologize for being fundamental and preaching first principles or any of those things. I am who I am, and I'm not a brotherhood scholar. I'm not a Greek scholar. I'm just somebody who loves to preach and enjoys what I do, and I'm humbled again that you asked me to come and be here. You bless me, and I've been blessed today by all of you. Shortly after creation, sin entered into the world. We remember what happened. The devil is not content to see innocence, and so the serpent comes, and we don't know. My students used to say, where did the devil come from? And I said, I don't know. And somebody said, well, did God create him? And I said, well, no, God didn't create him because God can't create evil. We can go back and try to read a lot of things. Of course, Milton wrote a book called Paradise Lost, and that's fiction, but to try to imagine the per se, and I think if we look at Revelation, it appears to be that Satan very well could have been an angel who was cast down from heaven. And that's really about all I can really figure out about it. But he's on the earth, and so Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden, and they've been told that you may eat of every tree except this tree here that's in the midst of the garden. Well, it's almost, you know how it is like with a child when you tell them not to do something? That's kind of a challenge. I told my students a long time ago that I was not going to tell them not to chew gum. Because if I did, they were going to chew gum, and then they were going to stick it on the bottom of the seat. So I said, you may chew gum. Just put it in a trash can. I never had a problem out of that anymore the rest of my time as a teacher. I wanted to pick my battles as a teacher. I had other things. Chewing gum wasn't one of them, as a teacher. And so here's the thing about the tree. It's in the midst of the garden. And there it is, and we don't know what it was. I don't know what kind of fruit it was. We hear apple, but, I might as well say a tangerine or an orange or whatever it might be. And now that I've learned from some people that tomato is a fruit, I still think it's a vegetable. But anyhow, that tomato is a fruit. Maybe it was a big old ripe tomato right there, a better boy or something, right in the middle of the Garden of Eden. I don't know. That'd have been more appealing to me than an apple. But anyhow, but here it is. So Satan comes. And Satan, the first thing he does, he comes to Adam and Eve, or he comes to Eve. But I think what's important to understand, if you read that story very carefully, Adam is kind of standing right there. Adam's not a long ways away. Here's the tree. God doesn't want you to eat of this, because if you do, you're probably going to be smarter than God. That's what he's afraid of, But I'm telling you, God said, but we've been told the day that we eat of this, we'll surely die. I know that, but let me say this. Now, this is what Satan does. Excuse me for using this strong word. I hope the kids stop up their ears and don't call anybody this. Satan's a liar. Okay? Satan is a liar. All right? Now, when I was growing up, I used to tell these little white lies. My sister told the big black ones, but I never told any of those. She'd tell the big ones, I'd tell the little ones, you see. Okay? Satan is a liar. Satan looked at Adam and Eve and he said, no, God said this, but I want to tell you, the day that you eat of it, I'm telling you, you shall not surely die. And so they eat of it. The woman saw that it was pleasant, verse 6 in Genesis 3. Then she gave to her husband with her, and he ate. Adam wasn't far away, was he? Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew they were naked. They heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden. Adam and his wife hid themselves from his presence. Why did they hide? Because they had done something wrong. Children, young, all of us remember, when did we hide from our parents, I made the fatal mistake one day of sassing my mother, and I ran and I got behind the bed and I was trapped. To this day, I hate them old bushes that bloom yellow in the spring. I just remember that switch. Every time I see those bushes, I cringe, because mother caught me. You see, and because I had done something wrong. So why do we hide? Why do people sin at night? Because it's dark. Well, they think they're hiding from God. And he said to Adam, where are you? And he said, I heard your voice, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. And that's not why you were hiding. Who told you that? And then God talked to them, and God said to them, why did you do this? And the woman said, Adam said, well, it was the woman you gave me. It was her fault. Guys, we've been blaming our wives for everything in the world, haven't we, for years, and it's just so easy to do. She made me do it, you know. My wife would tell you to never get in a car and go anywhere with me. In fact, she was so shocked that I made it here and didn't get lost, but I'd use that little thing on my phone. I get off the interstate and get turned around and go the wrong way almost. I can't remember which way I'm going, And we've had several arguments over that, And most of the time I have to admit she's right. And so here's the thing, but it was a woman you gave me, it was her fault. And God said, what is it you've done? And she said, the devil deceived me and I ate. And then we know because you've done this, you are cursed more than all the cattle. And then he tells them the things that own them, and basically they've got to go out now and feed themselves and work and give up the garden because they've sinned. But most of all, death enters into the world. I've often had that theological discussion with people along the way. What if Adam and Eve had never sinned about death? I don't know. I can't answer that. One of those questions I can't answer. But we know they sinned, and from that point on, we know people died. So we understand that sin has entered into the world. So the first thing I think we must understand is this, is we cannot ever underestimate the power of sin. Sin is devastating. It destroys lives, it destroys homes, it destroys marriages, it destroys government, it destroys everybody in so many walks of life. Sin. It's such a tiny little word with such devastating and incredible consequences. Just when I hear the word sin, I almost feel like it's a dirty word coming out of my mouth. Sin. And I just think about over the years, all the people that I've known and the times that we've sat down and we've talked about sin. Sin is a problem that none of us are immune from. Romans chapter 3 and verse 23 says, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. We take shots for immunity. I am the biggest coward in the world. Okay, I have to admit. We had a nurse practitioner, and I think she had to leave. But I am the biggest coward in the world when it comes to needles. I just want you to know, I am a baby, okay? I go in, and they got to draw blood. Is this going to hurt? I go to the hospital. They have to give me an IV. Once they had to use a pediatric needle because they could find my veins, the ones they put in babies. And next week I got to have a little surgery on my ear, but I just don't like needles, okay? But not long ago my doctor said, I need to give you your flu shot, and it's time for you to get your pneumonia shot. And I said, well, I've never had pneumonia, not since but he said, you might need this. Now, next thing I got to get, and I'm waiting on somebody to pay for it, is my shingle shot. I hear Medicare don't pay for that, so I'm waiting on my shingle shot, hoping one of these presidents will, give me a free shingle shot here eventually. But anyhow, because I had chicken pox really bad when I was little, and I've seen people with shingles. But, you take those shots. Now, I'm not getting into the COVID vaccine. I didn't take it. I had COVID twice. I had COVID the very first time in November of 2020 and was in bed for 3 weeks, was just really sick and couldn't preach for 3 weeks. And then I got COVID again 2 years ago, and it was a bad cold. Now, I've not taken the COVID vaccine. That's a political discussion, and we're not getting into that, all right? And if you took it, I'm glad you did. If you didn't, that's your business. We're not discussing it. I've seen people fight over that. That's not worth fighting over. We're brothers and sisters. We're not. If you want the shot, go get the shot. If not, whatever. Now, but we talk about those. We take those shots. I had mumps, measles. We get our children vaccinated so they don't get these diseases. Remember the dreaded disease? I saw polio eliminated in my lifetime. I had a cousin with polio. And then I remember back to third grade, and I started putting those sugar cubes. The school nurse would come, and we put those cubes in her mouth, and we took the polio vaccine. I've still got this massive scar. A lot of you have it. The younger people don't have it. Up here on our shoulder where we got the smallpox vaccine, I think's what it was called then, So I didn't die from any of those diseases, so I guess the vaccine works. But you see, here's the problem about sin. There is no shot you can take to make you immune from sin. There is a cure for sin. We'll talk about that tomorrow night. But there's no shot you can take because all of us have sinned. Not only that, but let me tell you this, all of us will sin as long as we're here on this earth. And if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. And the very minute you say, I'm not going to sin, the devil says, ooh, that's a good target right there. I want that one. And you put a bullseye on you. Let's talk about sin for a few minutes. Sin is a result in reality of missing the mark of God. Think about what sin really is. Sin comes from a Greek word meaning miss the mark. So the Greek archer would take his arrow and he would pull it back in the bow and he would shoot. And if he missed, he was said to have sinned in Greek. So when we sin, we miss the mark of God. Sin is literally missing the mark of God. Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. If we don't keep the commands of Jesus, we sin. I used to ask my students when I was teaching, I would put this verse on the board. If you keep my commandments, but if you don't keep my commandments, you're sinning. If you love me, you will. So I used to put on the board, I would ask my students, I would go up there and I would say, which commandments are not important? Now, you will be surprised about this. But I would start getting some answers from some of those kids. Well, I don't really think baptism's that important. Now, I don't think going to church is that important. I don't think that, really, Mr. Blankenship, all that really matters is you just love God and love Jesus. Brothers and sisters, let me tell you, that's the mindset of a lot of the religious world today. Only most of them don't even really believe that. But Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Which commandments, Jesus? I'm just dumb enough to think he meant all of them. Do I keep them all? No, I don't keep them all religiously. But that's what he meant. He meant what he said, and he said what he meant, and he meant what he said. So we sin, it's a result of temptation. Listen, James says, let no man, listen carefully, let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. God cannot be tempted with evil, neither does he tempt anybody or any man. Every man is tempted when he is drawn away by his own lust and enticed. Then when lust has conceived within, it bringeth forth sin. And sin, when it is finished, brings forth God. In the Garden of Eden, could Adam and Eve blame? Who could they blame for this? They blame God? They tried to blame God, didn't they? Well, but it wasn't God's fault. Adam, it's just a woman you gave me. No. When you sin, don't blame anybody, but go look in the mirror. Because it was your fault. God didn't sin. God didn't make you sin. And the fact of the matter, it says that God does not tempt any man. He cannot be tempted, and he doesn't tempt you. The devil tempts you. Every time I hear that, I think of the old Flip Wilson script. The devil made me do it. The devil made me do it. And that's right, he did. God doesn't make you sin. God doesn't tempt you. So we have to understand that. Sin is a result of temptation. Here's something else about sin. It usually starts out as a small thing. Any of you allergic to poison ivy? Right here. I haven't had it in a while, thank goodness. I'm hoping I grew out of that. But poison ivy, I just remember sometimes it started out as a small spot. And then you scratch it, and then it runs, and then it's here, and then it's on your face. And then, and I don't know how many times when I was young I had to go get a shot because I got in poison ivy. One day I had the brilliant idea, we were going to clear a baseball field, and I got my lawnmower, and I cut poison ivy. That was a mess. A week I lay in front, we didn't have air conditioning, I lay in front of a fan with the fan blowing on me because my legs were covered, But poison ivy starts out as a little thing. You remember leprosy in the Bible? Leprosy usually started out with just a small spot, usually on the hand, because you touched something that somebody else had. But then the next thing you might touch your face, and then leprosy spread and spread till it covered the whole body. Starts like just a little thing, Sometimes some of our sicknesses start out with a little thing, I got this little thing on my ear. It's called In fact, my wife said, they're actually going to do something about that. It's called basal cell or something or another. And the doctor said, there's a 1% chance this will spread. And I thought, wait a minute, you're going to cut half my ear off for something 1%? She said, well, it could go to your brain, but that's the last thing I need. Okay, so anyhow, but anyhow, I don't have much there to spare. So the fact of the matter is, though, but it's a little thing, but it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's what happens with sin. Sin starts out as a little thing. Now let's think about that. Let's think about that, for just a minute if we can. Here's David, King David in 2 Samuel. David is king of Israel. And one night David goes out on his housetop to bathe, and all the men are off to war where David actually should have been as the commander of the army, but he was home. And so David goes out, and he's looking, and there's a woman bathing. David, just go back in the house. Go back in the house, David. That's what he should have done. That's what he needed to do. Oh, no, but he didn't. He looked. He looked long enough till he lusted. And then we learn in the Scripture what happens is lust, when it is full grown, brings forth sin, and sin brings forth death. So we know what happened, don't we? David looked and David lust. Oh, now David, bring her to me. So she comes to his house. They have a physical relationship. Next thing we know, she sends a message to David. We got a little problem here. I'm expecting a child. Uh-oh. What's the penalty for this? Death, isn't it? By stoning. Wait a minute, there's an issue here. She's got a husband. Where's her husband? He's over there fighting in the army, Uriah. David says, I got this figured out. Bring Uriah home. I'll get him to go home. He can sleep with her. Everything's good. Got it covered. Sounds like Watergate, doesn't it? Almost, Cover up. Guess what? David wakes up the next morning and there's Uriah sitting on his front steps. Why didn't you go home and spend a night with your wife? I couldn't do that. My soldiers are out there on the battlefield. I couldn't go. What do you think David felt about that big? So David's only plan is send him back, have him killed on the battlefield. Remember when the man of God come to David and recounts all this story to him about the people that have the little lamb and somebody comes in and kills it? David says, I want to find out who that is. And he looked at him and he said, David, thou art the man. It was a little thing, folks. It was just a look. Maybe sometimes it's putting your arm around somebody. Maybe it's a pat. Maybe it's looking the wrong. Maybe it's sending the wrong message. But it starts as a little thing. I could tell you so many marriages, people that I've counseled with that have dissolved over just something, over a text message, over a glance, over a pat, over sending the wrong message. And you have to be so careful. You have to be so careful that I know the congregation where the song leader of that congregation, there was another lady there, and they sort of kind of got real friendly, and he would kind of go out and kind of give her a glance, and everybody in the church could see it. Next thing you know, it was a full-blown affair. Just innocent things. You see, sin starts out really small, and it just gets, worse and worse and worse and worse. I've never met a young person who said, my goal in life is to be a drug addict. They don't intend to be. But it's one drink, the next drink. You see, you don't know how your body responds. People always say to me, you ever tried alcohol? No. Why? Because I don't know how my body would respond. My body might like it. And I always told young people, don't do these things because you don't know. Maybe it's you start out with a few joints and then you graduate to something bigger, better, Little things. Sin always starts out small, but then it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And then not only that, but after you find yourself in that situation, sin makes you feel dirty. Dirty. Prodigal son. He's one of the, I'm toying about preaching a whole sermon on him. That's my favorite story in the Bible. He's a rich little Jewish boy. He's got everything in the world, and he wants his money, and he leaves home, and he goes over into that far country. Las Vegas. That's what I used to tell my kids. He went to Las Vegas, And the next thing you know, he don't have any money, and there's a famine in the land, and all of his buddies are gone. He was buying the drinks, he was buying the rounds, he was playing the cards, furnishing the women, and all of a sudden everything's gone. And where does he wake up? Where no little Jewish boy should be. Not only can they not eat the pigs, they should not wind up out there in a hog pen desiring the food that the hogs were eating, some old rough husk. He went from being a prince in his father's house to a pig pen. Now we know later in that psalm, David prayed, wash me, cleanse me, purge me, purify me, create within me a clean heart. Why? Because he felt dirty. 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 22 says that it happened to them according to the true proverb. We're going to talk about this after, not since before we ate. A dog returns to its own vomit, and a sow having washed her wallowing in the mire. Look, you can take a hog. We all know about hogs. Most of us do. We raised them growing up. And you can dress it up, and you can put a dress on it, and you can put lipstick on it. But as soon as it gets back near that slop and that mud, it's going to waller in it. Because a hog is always going to be a hog, We've all had dogs in our life most of the time. And if you've ever been around a dog very long, you're going to see what I'm going to tell you. Dog will eat something that'll make it sick, and it'll go over there and it'll throw it up, and about 30 minutes later it'll go right back there and eat the very thing that it just threw up. Now that makes me sick as I can be, and I'm glad I've already eaten, I preached at one place one time. They said, Brother Blake, don't talk about that before Sunday dinner. Do that on Sunday night, But the bottom line is it's dirty. And the bottom line is sin makes you feel dirty. It's nasty. Nasty. I've never known somebody who had committed adultery that really felt clean when it came to light. Somebody who got caught stealing something. Somebody who got caught in crime that didn't really, hopefully, feel most of the time remorse about it and feel dirty. For those of us that are Christians, we know better. But sin also does something else. It leaves a scar. It leaves a scar. Now, how many of you watched the movie Lion King? I used to show that way, way, way back when I was teaching John's Gospel to my kids because there was a lot of analogies between light and dark and those things. Remember what the bad lion's name was? Scar. I think there was a kind of I don't really approve of a lot of stuff Disney does, but I think they might have got a little bit of something right there, Scar, but you think about sin always leaves a scar. I read a story once about a man who gave his son a 2x4 and a nail. Tommy's probably told you this. He gave him a 2x4 and a nail and a hammer, and he said, drive the nail into the 2x4. He said, pull it out. Boy looks at him. Do it again, do it again, do it again. After about 15 times, boy looks up at his daddy, and he says, what's going on? He says, now I want you to pull out the holes. Can't do that. He said, I want you to remember that. Whenever you get ready to do something wrong, I want you to remember and understand this. Sin leaves a scar. How many children have I seen from broken homes who were scarred? How many people who I have seen who went down the path of drugs and alcohol who were scarred? About 4.5 years ago. No, a little before that. Maybe in the spring of 2019. I had a little boy in my class named Jacob Zolman. And when I began to preach out at Green Hill in January of 2019 out in Mount Juliet, now I'm preaching actually out of Mount Gladeville's where I'm preaching, but it's 5 minutes out of Mount Juliet. So I went to the Green Hill congregation to preach, and one day Jacob Zolman was in my class, and he said, Mr. Blankenship, where do you preach? And I told him, and he said, well, my dad and I are looking for a place to go to church. And that's not far from us. So the next Sunday, Jacob Zolman and his father Stephen Zolman came to church. Stephen Zolman was emaciated. He was emaciated because he'd been an alcoholic and a drug addict. and all those things in his life, and he had COPD, and he could barely breathe. And he came to church, and we talked, and for 3 weeks we talked in my office during Sunday school. And on Easter Sunday, he and Jacob were baptized. And for the last 2.5 years that I preached at Green Hill, he never missed a sermon. I preached his funeral a year ago last month. But I will tell you about Stephen. Stephen would look at you and he would simply say, use me as an example. I am a perfect example of what sin does to your body. I left my home in Pennsylvania, and I came to, there's a school over here, it's somewhere around Knoxville or in East Tennessee somewhere, and he was going, and I can't even remember the name of the school. My wife knows, she used to recruit all these schools, but he was going to be a minister in that religion, Seventh-day Adventist maybe, I believe, and there's a college over here somewhere like that. And so he studied, and then all of a sudden he got a job in a factory over here, and then he said, the next thing I know, I was trying to do this and that, and I started drinking. Before I realized it, I was a total alcoholic. And he said, after about 3 years, I woke up one day somewhere, and they thought I was dead. And he said, that was it. I never drank anymore. And he went into Alcoholics Anonymous and all the treatments and all of those things. And he was working at the mission in Nashville when I first met him, trying to help other people. The last 1.5 years of his life, he brought an oxygen tank to church. And he would come to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. He said, I gave so many years to the devil. And he would ask me, and Tommy, I know you've had people do this to you, and it breaks your heart, but he would ask me this almost every day, do you think I'm going to go to heaven? I've been so bad, can I go to heaven? And I would say, Stephen, you can go to heaven. I'm not God to judge you, but you've been baptized for the forgiveness of your sins. You've been washed in the blood of the Lamb. You've done everything that God's asked you to do. You can't go back and undo the past 50 years. Son Jacob's a faithful Christian, worships, he's over at Coastal Carolina, worships with the congregation at Myrtle Beach. But Stephen died and I preached his funeral. Because you see, sin leaves a scar. Sin leaves a scar. It always leaves a scar. Even the great apostle Paul, the evangelist, don't you think it bothered him later on in life when he reflected back on that day when he sat there and condoned for the death of the gospel preacher Stephen? You know that had to haunt him. That's why later on in life he could say, Jesus Christ came into this world to save sinners, of whom I am chief. You know that had to bother him. We've all done things. We have things in our past, and you understand sin can leave a scar, you know. I got a scar in the back of my head. It was not the result necessarily of sin, but it was a result one day that I was messing with my sister and I shot her with a cork gun. And we got in a fight with a broom and she pushed me down and I hit the corner of the wall and I split my head open and had to have 9 stitches. But that scar was a reminder for me to never fight with my sister again, okay? Sin leaves a scar. And so some of you, listen to me, you younger folks in here and others, you've been thinking about, don't do it because there's going to be a scar. And you know it won't ever go away. Let me tell you something else about sin. It hurts others. It hurts others. Oh, I've heard people say, if I do this, it's my business. If I want to drink, I want to go down in my basement and I want to close all the blinds and I'm going to do all of this and it's my business. And if I want to smoke, it's my business. If I want to do drugs, it's my business. If I want to do this, it's my business. It might be your business, but people are going to be hurt. First of all, sin hurts the sinners. Did I not just tell you about a man that was hurt by sin? Did I not just tell you about the devastating things that happens? Sin hurts the sinners. People I have counseled. You know, one of the worst things, and you know, the computer has been such a great thing for information and resource, but it's also been such a horrible thing because it put pornography, some of the most awful things in the world, a click away from our young people to tempt our young men and our young ladies and people. In fact, I had somebody tell me this once. One of the people at Opryland Hotel, back when you I guess you had to pay for movies some way or another there. You had to, like the adult movies or whatever, you had to do something extra with the cable to pay for them. He said that during youth minister conferences, not just Church of Christ, but during youth minister conferences and religious things, that the rate of pornographic movies was the highest it was at any time. Kind of sickening, isn't it? Scary when you think about it. I know 2 or 3 preachers who resigned and got in some serious trouble for that. It's a horrible thing. My brother runs a business up in Richmond, Kentucky, and he has his business set up where he knows what his employees are doing. People are watching. Okay. But the fact of the matter is sin, you can, but I want to tell you it destroys your mind. Pornography destroys you, and it causes evil things and evil thoughts, and it hurts so many other people. You know, let's go back to think about the story of the prodigal son. You know, he's over there having a good time, and he winds up in the pig pen, feels dirty. What do you think's happening back home? We don't ever hear anything about his mother, but his daddy. Where was his daddy when he started home? What was his daddy doing? He was looking for him, wasn't he? Because he saw him a great way off. Why do you think he saw him a great way off? Because he'd been looking for him. Been looking for him. I remember when I went away to college to Lipscomb, and then I came home, and I remember that night I pulled in up there at the house, and that was the night I got the ticket, by the way, I was telling the guys about earlier. But anyhow, when I pulled in, and my mother ran out of the house, and my daddy ran out of the house, and my little brothers, everybody ran out of the house to see me. And I'd only been gone like 3 months. They were glad to see me. But you see, sin hurts the sinner. But I want to tell you something else. Sin hurts so many other people too. It hurts others. You know, if we think about it for a few minutes, and we really contemplate, some things here, that sin hurts God as well. Let's go back a minute and think about David and Uriah. And look at that whole story, that what went on there. Who all was hurt? David is hurt, Uriah is hurt, the baby dies later. So many people are hurt. But you know, here's the thing about it. We talk about this. What if there was a way that you could build a box, you could get down in it, you could sin, nobody would ever know about it? And maybe you didn't get hurt, and nobody else got hurt. Somebody else is still hurt. God. You remember when Joseph was down in Egypt? Joseph is down in Egypt, and nobody knows him down there. You know, he's been taken a prisoner. Nobody knows who his father is. Nobody knows about his brothers. Nobody knows any of those things that are going on. He could have done anything he wanted to. Potiphar's wife comes to him and said, Joseph, let's have an affair. Come, you know, I can't do that. Can't do that. That wouldn't be fair to Potiphar, my master. You know. So every day this goes on, and finally one day she grabs him and rips off his garment, and she says, you know, let's do this. And here's what he said. How can I do this thing and sin against not Potiphar, not Pharaoh, not against myself, not against my father? How can I do this thing and sin against God? Sin hurts the sinner. Sin hurts other people. But I want to tell you something. Sin hurts God. Sin separates us from God. And I'm almost finished. Sin separates us from God. Samson has been told, do not cut your hair. Your strength lies within your hair, Samson. Don't cut your hair. Oh, but, you know, it happens. There's this woman, Delilah. Samson, tell me where your strength is. Oh, it's in new ropes when she binds him. Oh, it's in this, and she binds him a couple, 2 or 3 times. And then, guys, she uses the line on you that it's all over when it happens. And girls the same way. If you loved me, you'd tell me. If you love me, you'd do this. One of the most famous lines ever, that was a lie. If you loved me, you wouldn't ask me. Okay? Cut my hair. It's in my locks. She says, Samson, the Philistines are on you. And he went up, listen to this, some of the saddest words in all of the Bible, Judges 16 and 20. Samson rose up and went out to meet the Philistines, not knowing that the Lord had departed from him. Sad words. Because sin separates us from God. Because God cannot be where sin dwells. Do you remember Jesus on the cross? When he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why? Because God could not be where sin was. Jesus was carrying the sins of the world. Sin will enslave you. It'll take you farther than you ever wanted to go, and it'll keep you longer than you ever wanted to stay. Know ye not that to whom you yield yourselves servants to obey, Paul said, his servants you are to whom you obey, whether sin unto death or of obedience unto righteousness. If you serve God, you're a servant of righteousness. If you serve sin, you're a slave of sin. Sin will enslave you. It will keep you. It will not let you go. One of Aesop's fables says that the old lion got too sick to hunt. So as he was in his den, he sent out for all the other animals to come visit him. So the fox showed up. And the lion said, Mr. Fox, come on in and let's talk. And the fox stood at the door and he said, Mr. Lion, I really don't want to do that. Oh, the lion said, come on in. No, the fox says, I don't want to do that. The lion said, why not? He said, well, or the fox said, the lion said, why not? And the fox said, well, Mr. Lion, here's why. I see a lot of tracks going into your den, but I don't see any coming out. And that's the way sin is. There's a lot of tracks going in, but sometimes there's not a lot of paths going out. And once you are enslaved, sin, when it is fully conceived, desire, it brings forth death. It cost God His Son. I preached to funerals, so many students. One of the last years I taught, I had a beautiful little blonde-headed girl who was only a freshman in my geography class. She was really popular, beautiful little girl. I noticed at the end of the first semester she had been dismissed. Later I learned it was because the school knew that she was involved in drugs. 2 years later, I read her obituary in the Tennessean that she had overdosed. But it comes closer to home. Heather knows my sister Diane. I had a nephew who started dabbling in marijuana and drugs and then eventually Oxycontin, whatever you call that stuff. To the point he stole my sister's class ring and tried to pawn it. This is his mother now. He stole her laptop. He's stealing from the house. We have him put in all kinds of drug treatment. His girlfriend is with him in all of this. She goes to visit him in his rehab, and they find in a Menon speed stick, the sheriff might be interested in this, I don't know, but she finds in a Menon speed stick, down under it, pills. In a brand new Menon speed stick deodorant. She was smuggling him into rehab. They had a baby, little girl. I get a call from my sister, or my brother. Benji's dead. You see, Benji went to see my sister on her birthday on September the 20th, and I don't remember the date, 2016, 17, something like that, down in Lexington. And they went out to eat together, and he told my sister he was just back out of rehab. He was a student at Eastern Kentucky. He said, I need $50 for gas. And she said, you don't need that much money for gas. She gave him $20. But you see, she thought he was clean, but he wasn't. And so he bought his fatal dose. He goes back to his dorm room. He had on a beautiful Titans jersey. He was a Titans fan. He had on jeans, and he looked so neat and clean. But they also realized that he had gone back to his dorm room and he had injected himself in his leg, and that would be the last. She called him at 9 o'clock, and he said, I'm really sleepy and tired. She tried to call him back at 11. He didn't answer. She called him the next day. He didn't answer. Finally, on Monday night, she gets my brother, other brother, who lives in Richmond, to go over to the dorm room. They kick open the door. They open the door through security, and there's Benji slumped over his desk, and he's dead. We walked to the casket. This is hard. My sister said, tell me he went to heaven. And I said, I can't. God will judge you. But I can't answer that. Because you see, sin brings forth death. It cost God His Son. It's cost so many people their loved ones. And I'll bet there's some people here who've been directly affected by it. And I know you, our law enforcement people, see it all the time. They're such great people. The power of sin. There's an answer. And I want to talk about that maybe tomorrow night, but I just want to mention tonight. Sin is powerful, but God has the answer. God has commended His love toward us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for the ungodly. You can come tonight as a sinner. Believing that Jesus is the Son of God, you can confess your faith, and you can be buried in baptism, and His blood will wash away your sins regardless of how bad they've been. He will cleanse you and make you as white as snow, as we stand and sing. And thine affections been nailed to the cross, is thy heart right with God? Dost thou count all things for Jesus but lost? Is thy heart right with God? Is thy heart right with God? Washed in the crimson flood, cleansed and made holy, humble and lowly, riding the sun.